I have to point out, you did achieve your aim with a 30% club, so that is great. But elsewhere, as we've just highlighted, it's not looking so great, is it?
No, and I think International Women's Day is obviously a day to celebrate the progress made, but it's also a time to reflect on the things that we still have to do. Your colleague just talked about the idea that emerging markets were the trade of the decade. I'd say women were the trade of the decade.
Yeah.
Actually, if we invest more in women, we will see very significant returns, as the PwC report suggests.
Are you getting a sense, though, at the moment that even though we're still not at that point where we have true gender parity, gender equality, equal pay, there's diversity fatigue setting in?
Definitely, and I mean, that's the irony, really, that people seem to fatigue without having achieved very much. But obviously the talk and the lack of results following through the talk is kind of frustrating a lot of people, not just the women. I think there are a lot of men, particularly in the investment industry. A lot of the chief executives of companies are very, very keen to see more women and more other diverse talent make its way through to improve the diversity of thinking, really, and to guard against groupthink. So it is frustrating for everybody, but I think change needs to be more radical. It needs to be more holistic as well. At the moment, what we have is sort of little initiatives sometimes at the side of desks, not a rethink of how do we promote people, what are the characteristics that we're really measuring people when we assess their performance.
How do you deal with that frustration so that everybody, women and men, are on board and working towards the same goal?
Well, it has to be a collaborative exercise. I mean, the reason I think the 30% Club actually did achieve its goal has been because it very much involved men. We didn't have it that it was women talking to women about women's issues. It was a very inclusive discussion. The men often are the ones with power, and so they need to be brought into the conversation. And they also need to feel that it's not all their fault. I mean, this is not a blame game. This is actually saying, OK, well, we all agree it's a problem, so let's do something about it. And let's do things that obviously affect people right the way from attracting people into the industry to then making sure that they genuinely feel that there's an inclusive culture for them to thrive in.
Henrietta?
I think that's an interesting question, actually, is what one can do to get women to come into certain industries more than they are at the moment. Financial industry being a prime example of that. For me, there is still a gender imbalance in asset management, where I belong. What do you think needs to happen from an educational perspective for that to be more appealing to women?
Well, we need to get out and about more. I mean, the diversity project that I chair, which is a cross-industry initiative, so that we can sort of gather together and make this more impactful, what we're doing, is definitely trying to go to universities, to schools, to talk much more about what we do, but also showcase the role models, people who actually enjoy what they do, and not necessarily all senior women. So that's the other thing, that if someone's thinking about a career, they don't necessarily want to talk to someone who's in their 50s like me. They want to see that somebody who's close to them in age, who actually enjoys what they do and who maybe they can relate to.
Janet?
Yeah, how do you think the increasing focus in ESG investing would help drive this diversity and inclusion in the workplace?
Well, I think in two ways, actually. It's noticeable that the majority of ESG teams in asset managers are actually comprised of women. So this is one way. I mean, you can say there's all sorts of stereotyping going on there, but actually we do tend to care a lot about these longer-term issues. So that has changed the dynamic in terms of, you know, who is working there. But also, of course, this is holding companies much more to account now. It's much less checking a box. This is actually having dialogues about how companies are following through with their commitments to, for example, have women on their boards, but also close their gender pay gaps. So we're trying to create this virtuous circle and to break through the frustrations. I think we need to make sure, so say that we don't just keep also pursuing things that aren't working. So there's been a little bit of a sense, I think, that if something's done in the name of diversity, it's sacrosanct and we mustn't ever question it. And that's not how we do other aspects of our business. If something's not working, we review it, we change tack. If you keep shooting a goal at in the wrong direction, you're never going to score. So we've just got to be more open-minded, I think, and really listening to what the women are experiencing.
Yeah, and in terms of listening to women, I mean, this is also to pick up on what Henrietta was saying about women, particularly in finance. Do you get a sense that for example, men in the very top positions might be listening to women, but they're not actually understanding their day-to-day experiences?
Definitely. So one of the things I'm most proud of with the 30% Club actually isn't so much the boards, but actually we have this huge cross-company mentoring program. So nearly 2,500 people are on it, and there's a big event today actually around International Women's Day. And over half of the mentors every year are men. And what they say is that, I mean, the women are more candid with them because they feel they can talk freely and it won't sort of get back to their manager, as it might do possibly, or they might be afraid of in their own company. And the men say it opens their eyes as to the issues that women are really facing, but probably wouldn't tell them if they were working directly for them. So I think it's this question of, just breaking through this impasse that we seem to reach and getting men actually to mentor women and to hear firsthand.
Yeah, you also talked about things that weren't working, and we have to be honest about that and not be afraid to make the change the way you would in a business. Can you give us an example of one or two things, approaches that really don't work and how they could be made better?
So all the evidence suggests that simplistic, computer-based, mandatory unconscious bias training actually is counterproductive. There's a great report called Why Diversity Programs Fail, written by a Harvard professor that documents, the actual statistics around if you put in place these very simplistic training programs, what happens is it's counterproductive because people feel it's their fault. They're part of the problem. They don't feel they're part of the solution. And they also feel there's nothing they can really do. Sure, they understand their biases, but there's nothing they can do to overcome them because they just are unconscious. So that's the sort of thing that I frankly think we shouldn't bother with anymore. We should work much more on, for example, real sort of classroom-based training and having people experience, perhaps even using this sort of virtual reality. We're trialing that next week. I'm going to have an experience where somebody gets put on something where they see what it's like to be the woman in a different situation. And I'm intrigued as whether it works or not. But just saying, oh, you're all making mistakes and you're all treating people badly is really not going to endear ourselves.
Yeah, what scenarios are they going to use for that virtual reality session?
I'm
intrigued.
I know. I'll come back and report.
I just have a final thought, and I don't know whether Janet and Henrietta, you have the same thought, but we keep coming back to the issue of the pipeline. How do you get around that issue? Because you've mentioned in some of your articles and research that it's in the hiring process where the real problems lie as well.
It's hiring, but then also people's experiences when they join.
Yeah.
So there's a huge amount of fine talk. But actually what happens is each week, actually, women who are from across the industry send me emails or call me or talk to me after I've spoken at a conference about their actual experience of being experiencing bias or experiencing discrimination, or just feeling, if they've negotiated flexible working, that there's a sort of, looking at the watch, leaving now sort of thing. And so people aren't walking the walk. And that obviously has to change. So if you're going to if we're going to focus on hiring, we've got to make sure that people actually really then enjoy their experience, feel they can give their all, and feel they can be a woman, and not to sort of feel they have to fit in with a sort of masculine definition of success.
And for me, it's not just the companies that need to be involved in that kind of discussion, because I do think there's an element of government and the sort of organisation of childcare, for instance, to facilitate women in the workplace. And I think in a country particularly like the UK, I have friends that were at university with me who've dropped out of the workforce. Part of it is due to childcare concerns and the organisation of that element.